Mindset Mavericks, your blueprint for bold thinking and boundless growth.
So, welcome to Mindset Mavericks. In this episode, we delve into the art of public speaking and the power of storytelling. Danny Brassell shares insights and actionable tips to enhance communication skills and connect authentically with audiences. Very big welcome, Danny. I'm really excited to have you on and to just speak a bit about your journey and give some actionable tips to our listeners. So thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, John. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you very much. So what I like to do is find out a little bit about the guests. I know you've had an interesting journey to get to where you are today, and you started off as a teacher. So can you take us back to those early days? What influenced you growing up and what made you go into teaching?
Well, if I was going to write an autobiography, John, it would probably be called Pivots, because I feel like I've already lived 9 different lives. 30 years ago, I was a journalist. I got to cover President Bush Sr. in the 1992 presidential election. I had a great job. I loved working as a journalist. Got to meet every editor of every major daily. And one editor of a major daily offered me a city beat job for $16,500 a year. And then a friend told me they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And it turned out I fell in love with teaching. I've actually taught all age levels, from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. And then in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could focus on all the negatives, but I'm a positive person. I like to focus on the positives. I learned a lot from that experience. First of all, my wife is my soulmate. She stood by me when I put her through the ringer. She's just an incredible human being. Second of all, I no longer look at money as the end all be all, because I learned you can lose it just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people, because if I was somebody looking at what I had done, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize, unless you know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to admit, but the more I read the Bible, I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth, I didn't want to file for bankruptcy. And so my accountant said, well, you have to earn this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit that number right on the number. Well, then the next year, John, he said a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. So in year 3, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically during one of the worst economic downturns in world history, I was able to create a very lucrative speaking business, which was rolling along great until 2020, when a thing called COVID came around, and people asked, well, how's business? I'm like, oh, it's great how they closed down the world, and I just lost 200 speaking engagements overnight. It's really great. Well, for years, people have been asking me to coach them, and I always resisted, John, because as a teacher, I've always had a very high standard for my students. I will not let them fail. I will keep you accountable until you succeed. Well, working with entrepreneurs and business owners and executives has been a real treat for me, because they're highly motivated and they do the work. And I just take so much pleasure in watching them succeed. So it's a very long answer to your short question, but I've lived lots of different lives.
Yeah, it does sound like there's been a lot of pivots throughout there. I'd like to go back to some of them and just explore them in a bit more detail. I know you said that one of the kind of factors that got you into teaching was the higher pay, but was money for you, has it always been a driving force?
Not really. I think money was more of a driving force when I got married. My wife wanted me to make more money. I think that's why men live longer when they're married, because their wives push them. I'm always been an odd person. I always wanted to be famous was the big thing. And it's kind of silly, but I always wanted to be the kind of person who I could just say hello to a kid and they would remember that moment for the rest of their lives, and somehow I could have a meaningful impact. So that was more of a driving force than the money. The money, well, now that I'm at this point, you can chop off my head and count the rings. I'm an old guy. Money's not that big of a deal to me anymore. It's kind of nice because the people I work with, I'm old enough that I refuse to work with jerks. And if money's their driving force, then I don't really want, I want people that want to make the world a better place.
It sounds like from some of the things you've mentioned already, you're quite a kind of confident and outgoing person. And I think to go into public speaking, you just naturally assume somebody is a confident and outgoing person. Is that quite an accurate description?
Well, I mean, I was speaking to some schools in India in 2018. I got one school, the kids are all pumped up. They're coming up to me after the presentation, and they're great. And then I look in, there's this 6-year-old boy. He's looking up to me. He's got tears in his eyes, and I notice he's missing his left arm. And he looks up. He's like, "Well, how can I succeed?" And so I bend down. I get down to his eye level. I'm like, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody used to call me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I went to a school, and a teacher, she would sing things to me, and I found I could sing them back without my stutter, kind of like the movie The King's Speech. And eventually I lost my stutter and I became a swan. But I looked at that boy in the eyes. I'm like, isn't it interesting that the little boy people used to make fun of because he couldn't speak right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the earth to do what? And he gets the biggest grin on his face. He's like, speak. I'm like, don't let anybody ever tell you what you can't do. Anything is possible. Don't limit yourself. And so, I mean, yes, people think I'm extroverted now and I'm speaking all the time, but it didn't come naturally. I mean, now I've never met a microphone I don't like. I get excited, but every now and then you can still hear my stutter because I get so excited. I start speaking too quickly and I start stumbling on my words. But I'm glad I had that experience. It gave me a lot of empathy. I work with, you and I were talking earlier. I work with some famous people and some speakers, and my business partner likes to name drop all of them. I'm not a person that likes to share the names of everybody I work with. Most of the people I get the most satisfaction working with are business owners. A lot of them have stage fright. They're terrified. I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was working with a group of engineers at a very large technology company in Silicon Valley. Engineers are kind of introverted people, John. They're not exactly stage people. And I was working with one gentleman. He's Indian, and he's terrified. He's like, "Oh, Danny, please, you got to make me funny. People are not going to listen to me." Just the nicest guy on the planet. He has a very difficult name to pronounce, and I'm not going to tell you his real name. So now the way we changed his presentation, so he starts his presentation now. He's like, "Hello, I am Shubhankar Majahardin. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly." And the whole point, I'm not trying to get him to be a stand-up comedian. All I'm trying to help my people do is how can you connect with your audience as quickly as possible? And so I'm a little bit different than a lot of coaches in that a lot of people teach you to talk about your most traumatizing story. I mean, you shared a story with me earlier about moving because there was a shooting nearby and you have kids. And I know stories like that. The reason I try not to go through stories like that with people is 3 reasons. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need more stories of sadness. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all, what I do with people is I'm teaching them how to create what I call a well-crafted story. Politicians would call this a stump speech. In superhero movies, they call it your origin story. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. This is a speech that you're going to deliver again and again to introduce yourself to new clients, to get new customers. And so the question I ask people is, do you really want to tell that sad story again and again? I mean, I have a friend, his daughter was killed in a school shooting. He's told that story over 1,000 times. I have no idea how he does. There's no way I could do that. And then third, and this is where people get angry with me, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. Personally, I believe that there's something admirable about that as my goal. I believe the people that tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time you're telling it, now those are crocodile tears, and now you're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower when I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are more ethical ways to get people interested in doing business with you. And so, again, that's a very long answer to your short question. I don't think I even remember what the original question was. I went around there, but hopefully that served your audience.
Because you've had a stutter in the past and that's been a limiting factor for you, do you think you've spent so much time focusing on how to get past that that it's given you additional skills that you might have not have had if you hadn't gone through that experience?
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of empathy for people that are that's what Jerry Seinfeld has the funny line. He says, people's worst fear is public speaking. People's second worst fear is death. So if you ever go to a funeral, more people would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy. And I empathize with people that are nervous, and I want your audience to understand this, Jon. Speaking is just a skill. It can be learned. I've worked with some people that had really and also, just so you know, you're in good company. Barbara Streisand, before she sings, she always pukes before she goes on stage because she's terrified. President Reagan used to vomit before every speech that he gave. Some people vomited after the speech. Bill Russell, the famous basketball player, he used to vomit before he had to play in games. So you're in good company. There are people that are terrified, and there's just ways. I work with people. If you really want to get better at speaking, here we'll just get down to grassroots. Brass tacks. Okay, there's two ways to get better at speaking. First of all, you should watch lots of speakers. I watch 10 speakers a day. I watch politicians, I watch comedians, I watch televangelists, I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. Here, I'll give you a ninja strategy. I like to watch a lot of televised award shows, because when a person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their 45 seconds. Now, most people waste their time. They get up there and they're like, I want to thank God, I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody pays attention. But every now and then, a person does a great, masterful job. There was a guy a couple of years ago by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is Hollywood, Jon. All the important people are in the front of the auditorium, the actors. And you can tell the camera's scanning the crowd. Nobody's paying attention. It's film editing. And Joe Walker gets on stage. He's British, and he speaks very slowly and deliberately. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera's scanning the crowd, and you see people leaning in like, what's he talking about? And he says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. Joe Walker gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said he was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting. So watch speakers. That's the first way to get better at speaking. The second way to get better at speaking is I've had lots of wonderful mentors throughout my career. One of my mentors was a guy by the name of Jim Rohn. And Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to do the work. You got to get out there and speak. Even the smallest towns have service organizations like Lions Club, Optimist Club, Garden Club, Women's Club, Rotary Club. They got schools, they got churches, synagogues, temples, chambers of commerce. I had a client about 3 years ago, Jason. Jason drove me nuts. He's 22 years old, and he was just a negative Nelly. I don't know anybody, Danny. I can't speak. I don't know where to get on stage. It drove me nuts, Jon. I can't stand that. So finally, I just said, Jason, do you have a Facebook account? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, we're going on right now, Facebook Live. And he gets all nervous. I'm like, we're going on Facebook Live right now. And so I made him get on. And for 45 minutes, he delivered the talk that we had just created. And one woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally watched him. And guess what, Jon? He sucked. And I forced him to go on Facebook Live the next day. I didn't watch him the next day. He said 3 people watched him, and he sucked. But he didn't suck as bad as he did the first day. Well, here's the reason I give the story of Jason. Jason has gone on Facebook Live every single day for the last 3 years. He now has 6,000 people in his Facebook community. And last year, he almost made 7 figures selling them different products. That's the power of consistency and practice. And that's the reason I tell this. It's not because of the money he made, which that's great for him. What makes me so proud of him is he did the work. He actually was consistent. And I'm not saying you have to do it every single day or whatever, but it certainly helps. And Jason was just like most of my clients. He was not comfortable on stage. He was terrified. And roundabout to the answer to your question, yes, my stutter was a great thing. I think that's where we learn. I know you have stories about that. It's our adversity that teaches us our greatest lessons.
Yeah, and just you kind of mentioned it or touched on it then about the importance of public speaking. I say public speaking, but it's just really communication, not just for public speaking, but for in everyday life. So can you tell us a bit about some of the transformations you've seen and how that's actually impacted lives by becoming a better communicator? I think you've just given one of those examples then for doing live public speaking, but just in terms of networking and some of the other opportunities.
So that's a great question. And this is what I love. So I run a company called Well Crafted Story Workshop with my two partners, Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because I have an academic background, so I'm the professor. Jimmy comes from Broadway, so he's the performer, and Dave is a former attorney, so he's the producer behind the scenes. And so we take people, we call it our 5 C's process. That's just our process. If you look across different speaking programs, they have a similar process. But the 5 C's are clarity, connect, content, call to action, and close. And so before I work with anybody, before we craft a presentation, we have to answer 2 clarity questions. And if you can answer these questions, you're in pretty good shape. And if you cannot, you're going to struggle. And you'd be amazed, Jon, 95% of the people I work with cannot clearly answer one or both of these questions. The first question is, who is your audience? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, my audience is everybody. I'm like, well, if your audience is everybody, your audience is nobody. There's a lot of wisdom in the riches or in the niches. And it sounds counterintuitive. Actually, I'll give you a great example. I worked with a woman, Kathy. Kathy, you talk about a niche. Kathy's niche is she makes saddles for professional polo players. I'm like, wow, that's quite the niche. And I asked her, I'm like, well, how much money did you make last year? And she's like, oh, about $800,000. I'm like, I need to start making saddles for professional polo players. Holy cow, who would know that there's this huge niche for that? And so really what you want to do is figure out what's your niche. I mean, I always tell people that you should really go for the lowest hanging fruit. What's something that you're very familiar with? So what's a profession you've been part of or a group that you've been part of? If you're a Boy Scout, well, then speak to Boy Scouts to begin with. I know you have a law enforcement background. I would say you'd be very comfortable speaking to law enforcement. I began my career in speaking since I had been a teacher. I started by speaking to teachers, and then I started speaking to parents, and then I started speaking to school administrators. And then I was in a mastermind, and one of the guys in my mastermind had a very successful company, and he wanted me to train his sales force. And I'm like, I don't think I'm qualified to teach a sales force. I'm just a teacher. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. He's like, Danny, if you can get teenage boys in the inner city to read Shakespeare, I'm pretty sure you can motivate my sales force. And I'm like, oh, it was good. He expanded my mind. So I'm not saying you can't grow your audience, but you should really start with a very specific audience. So the first question is, who is your audience? The second question is, what is the problem that you solve? And you'd be amazed. Most people actually have no idea what the problem is that they solve, because most people, rather than address the problem, which this is very important. You need to think about your audience, not about you. Donald Miller runs a company called StoryBrand. I completely agree with Donald Miller. He says, when you're a speaker, you're the guide, and your job is to make your audience feel like the hero. You're Yoda. Your audience is Luke Skywalker. I completely agree with him on that. You need to edify your audience, but you need to talk in their language, talk about their problems rather than your solution. So I was working with a whole bunch of fitness instructors. I said, well, what's the problem that you solve? And they said, healthy living. Well, healthy living is a good thing. Maybe the problem that you're solving is obesity. That's a problem, or diabetes, something like that. I work with tons of financial planners, and they always say, oh, having a healthy retirement. I'm like, well, healthy retirement's a good thing. You should want, maybe the problem that you solve is people have enough money until the day they die. And so addressing like a question of yours on how I see it doing good in the world, Jimmy and I worked with a guy named Richard. a very successful financial advisor. And Richard used to start off his presentation. He'd say, well, my name is Richard. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've made over $1 billion for my clients. I've worked with this famous person and this famous person. I said, Richard, time out. What are the three most important elements of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation. The beginning of your presentation, you really need to show people that you're just like them. And so we changed his opening story. And so now he starts off, he talks about the very first client that he booked 30 years ago. And it's a hilarious story, John. He makes so many mistakes. I have no idea why these people invested money with this guy. I mean, it was just catastrophe. And this is what was interesting, John, about Richard. So the way he gets clients is about twice a week. He has these presentations at a fancy steakhouse, and he has about 15 couples in their fees, and they watch his presentation. They get a free steak dinner. And he said, out of the 15 people, maybe 6 of them would book a call to learn more about his financial services. But he always noticed that the husband used to usually have his arms crossed and look stern, like, what's he trying to sell me? How much is it going to cost? Now that he's changed his story, he noticed immediately the same guy, instead of crossing his arms, he's patting his knee because he's laughing so hard. And he said he's gone from 6 of the 15 booking an appointment to 12 of the 15 booking the appointment. This is where I measure my success. I only measure success one way when you speak. It's how many people decide to take the next step with you. Now, the next step, it can be an unpaid next step. So like, for example, for you, it could be like, subscribe to my podcast. Or it can be like Richard, book a free phone call. It can be a paid offer, like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. But we're looking at, how do you create a presentation that doesn't just move hearts, but how does it move the needle? How do we get more people to do business with you? And the reason that's so important to me, John, is one of my mentors was a guy by the name of Zig Ziglar. He's a very famous speaker. He spoke for about 30 years. And towards the end of his career, he did a survey to find out how much of an impact he had had. And this was startling. Out of every 100 letters that he received, only one of them talked about his speeches. The other 99 were about his cassette tapes, his books, his video program. And this is very important. You can really help your audience a little in a 1-hour speech, but you can help them a lot by having a lifetime relationship with them. And the way you build that lifetime relationship is get their name, get their email, keep on inspiring people. I mean, I have a woman I'm working with right now. She was on my email list for 11 years before she decided to do business with me. I'm like, wow, I'm glad I was emailing for 11 years, but that it took 11 years, but you never know. And so that's where I'm seeing the impact. I mean, everybody that is in your audience that's running a business, I hope that when they're looking at their business, they're looking at, how can I change the world? I mean, I'm a huge fan of Steve Jobs. I use him as an example all the time. He's a phenomenal speaker. He does so many things really well. And I don't think he even knew all the things he was doing well. But if you read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, he would yell at his engineers, like, we need to get the computer to start up quicker, because if you can get it to start up 3 seconds quicker, multiply that by the number of people using an Apple, that's the equivalent of like 800 years. He's like, basically, you're going to save 83 people's lives if you can get this computer to start 3. I mean, he'd put it in those types of terms, but I'm like, that's actually really good psychologically. He believed in him. He's like, this product, and this is great advice for everybody on stage. What you should be looking at, because a lot of people, one of the biggest things I'm helping people do is, how do you sell without sounding salesy? Because there's all these slick willies. I don't want to be, I've been to so many presentations where I'm like, ugh, I feel appalled that I was just there. You can do it in a more ethical way. And what you should be doing is looking at your audience like, I have the antidote. You all are dying. If you don't get my antidote, you will die. If you stop looking at selling your audience and start looking at serving your audience, you'll go much farther. Will everybody work with you? No. But I think that when you're on stage, you have a responsibility. Whether people decide to do business with you or not, they gave you their time. You should help them as much as you can. you never know. It's just like your podcast, John. I was listening to your podcast one day. I was kind of down, and it lifted me up. And that's powerful, John. Like, it doesn't matter how many people listen to your podcast. All matters is who. Like, there might be a person out there that was really feeling down about their business, about what they wanted to do, and listening to an hour podcast was able to change their life in a positive way. You have no idea that the impact that you're having.
And I think with particularly public speaking, you're trying to compel somebody to take an action, whether that is purchasing from you, trying to change something in their mindset to improve themselves, whatever it might be. So what are some of those key components that we should be looking for stories, whether it's context, action, what the resolution is? What should we be trying to incorporate to get?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Yeah. I mean, the two biggest mistakes I see most people make in presentations. So everybody listening, write this down unless you're driving. First of all, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. She's a speaker in Houston, Texas, and she talks about the importance of showing your vulnerability. And I completely agree with her on that. The number one strategy I share with people: stop sharing all of your successes. Start talking about your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you talk about your own failures, the more they're going to start to see themselves in you. Jimmy has a great way of saying this. In the first 5 minutes of your presentation, you got to rap. So the rap is my contribution, because I used to be a teacher. Everything has to rhyme or be alliterative. So rap stands for relatability, authority, and purpose. So first of all, you got to show the audience that you're relatable to them. You got to show them that you're just like them, that, oh, wow, this is a person just like me. I'll go back to President Reagan. President Reagan was a great example of that. By the way, when I use political examples, it has nothing to do with politics, just the politician. President Reagan was a millionaire who lived in Bel Air, California, and he was able to convince auto workers in Detroit, Michigan, that they could have a beer with him. That's power. He was able to relate to different people. So that's relatability. A is authority. You got to show your audience that you've had the problem that they're suffering from, but you solved that problem. And then the P is your purpose. And then you got to show them why it matters. There's lots of research on this, and this is why I'm the professor. I like things. If you want an opinion, go to your Aunt Ethel. If you want research-based approaches, that's why you come to me. There's lots of research that shows that people want to feel like they're part of something bigger. So like Howard Schultz for Starbucks, he doesn't believe Starbucks is a coffee company. He believes it's a community building organization, that he's building communities. Well, that's a better mission. It's a purpose. So the first mistake I see most people make is they're bragging all the time. You got to stop that. You really got to, and that's, to me, it's natural. It's a great way to add humor, because to me, the best type of humor is when it's self-effacing. Since you're in London, you're giving me British examples in my head. When I was in college as an undergraduate, one of my statistics professors was this guy named John Warren. And John Warren was about 4 feet tall, from Britain. And the very first class, he came in and he looks at us. He's like, I'm John Warren. I've been in America about 25 years. I came to America and studied at the University of North Carolina on a basketball scholarship. And all of us loved him immediately, because he was about 4 feet tall. And if you watch, that's why I like watching comedians. This is a really good strategy for people. Watch comedians. They're the best at this. Kevin Hart is a short black guy, so he makes a lot of jokes about being a short black guy. Jim Gaffigan is a big fat white guy, so he makes a lot of jokes about being a big fat white guy. That's a really smart strategy. When you take what you perceive as your weakness and you turn it into your strength, like, people can't even debate you on it. That's why, like, when I was working with Shubanikar, I'm like, why don't you make fun of your own accent, and you're going to put your audience at ease. Your audience is going to be like, oh, this is great. So that's the first mistake I see people make. Second one, this is a big one, is stop giving multiple offers. The mind cannot process more than one thing at a time. I always say choices confuse and cause you to lose. So this will be a gem for you, John. I was on about 4 different podcasts yesterday, and on 3 of the 4 podcasts, as a matter of fact, at the end of the podcast, the host said, make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. And I told all of them, like, you just gave your audience 3 things to do. They're not going to do any of them. You got to give them only one clear choice. one clear choice. And so when I'm working with people, the other thing that really stops people is they go from teaching, and psychologically, once they make their offer, they start to apologize. Oh, and now I have to sell you something. No. Again, get the service mindset. And during the content portion of your presentation, I like to show people how to whisper sweet nothings in people's ear. So let's say it's you, Jon, and you're trying to get people to listen to your podcast, subscribe to your podcast. And let's say I always tell people I only want 3 teaching points because people can't process more than 3 things. People remember things in threes: 3 blind mice, 3 little pigs. This is my school teacher in me. I'm thinking of all little kid examples, but it's usually people think in threes. And so let's say that your 3 teaching points is my podcast. I'm going to teach you how to build a business, how to not make your business run your life, and how to have a lasting impact with your business. Okay. I gave that because most audiences have 3 motivations. I call them the 20-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, and the 60-year-olds. The 20-year-olds want to learn how to make more income. The 40-year-olds want more freedom because they're not spending enough time with their families. And the 60-year-olds are now more concerned about their legacy. What kind of impact am I having? And so what I would do is I'd whisper sweet nothings while I'm teaching. And so it would work something like this. Danny is a person that was listening to my podcast and discovered all kinds of ways he could build income through this. Okay. I don't know if you heard what I just did. What I just did is I'm teaching, and I just mentioned I have a podcast. And so now your audience is like, Jon has a podcast. I wonder what his podcast is. I wonder when that podcast, what's the name of the podcast? And so what's happening is I've already got your brain in the audience in motion, thinking about your podcast, so that when you come to your offer, which is subscribe to my podcast, the Mindset Maverick, your audience now, rather than feeling like they're sold, they're like, oh, I'm so glad he told me the name of that podcast. I was really hoping he would because I need to subscribe to that podcast. There's nothing salesy about that at all. Instead of pushing people to an offer, they're like trying to pull it out of you. Like, please tell me, what's the name of the podcast? So that's the different psychology there. When you and I first met, the first thing I said is, I'm so glad you have that book behind you, Influence.
Yeah.
I think every entrepreneur in the world should have a copy of Robert Cialdini's Influence. The thing I love about Robert Cialdini, he's a professor emeritus at Arizona State University. And that book is all about ethical sales. And it starts with this premise: if it's not win-win, don't do it. It has to be a win for the client and a win for the provider. And I love that. Like, there's plenty of pie for everybody. I was talking to a speaker last week, and I gave him a whole bunch of contacts. And this is what he said to me, Jon. He's like, well, why would you do that, Danny? You're my competition. And I just laughed. I'm like, well, that's where you and I differ. I have no competition. I only have potential collaborators. You need to have an abundant mindset. I mean, Jon, you and I could actually teach the exact same thing, and I would still collaborate with you because we don't teach it the same way. And maybe there's a person that they're in the London area, and they're like, I don't want to deal with Danny. He's all the way in the States. I'd rather. So I'm like, here, go to Jon. Jon's right there. He's great for you. Why would I do that? Because I feel that people are generally pretty cool. And eventually you'd be like, oh, I got somebody that lives in America. I'll send them over to Danny. That's the way the world should work. I don't understand this, oh, I have to win and you have to lose. I just think that's a really poor way to view things. That's me. Everybody's a little bit different, but that's me. I think that there's plenty of, I once had a coach, Barbara. She was wonderful because she got me realizing that when I'm stuck at a stoplight, I'm surrounded by $1 million worth of cars. She got me seeing things in a very different way. Like, wow, there's so much abundance. I mean, this is why I stopped watching the news, because the news is all about negativity and scarcity and, world's going to end. But I don't believe that. I believe if all you have to do is, I used to be a history teacher. If you look at the history of the world, good ultimately triumphs over evil. Over 100 years ago, there was this horrible environmental catastrophe happening on the planet. Horses were spilling so much manure and peeing all over the streets and dying. It was causing all kinds of horrible emissions into the ozone. And so they had this conference in New York City to try and figure out how to solve this environmental problem, and nobody could solve it. And then one guy solved it. His name was Henry Ford. He created the automobile. And now we're, oh, automobiles, the emissions are horrible. I'm like, somebody will figure, if there's an asteroid headed towards Earth, I am convinced this is the way to end wars. If you want to end wars, have an asteroid headed straight to Earth. I guarantee you, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, America, we'd all figure out, okay, we'll blow up that asteroid so we can. Humans are a lot more innovative than we give them credit for. So I'm going off on my tangent, but yeah, those are the biggest mistakes I see in most presentations and things that anybody can help alleviate.
Yeah, similar to you, I think the world's such a big place and there is so much different personalities, etc. around. There's enough business for everyone in the world. And I think that's part of the importance of building a brand as it is anyway. I wanted to go on to building a brand specifically and just the importance of storytelling and brand identity and how you can, or if you can give us any strategies for integrating storytelling into your marketing efforts to build your brand.
So here's an exercise everybody can do. Later on, sit in a comfortable chair with a pen and paper and a libation of choice. And for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of the grocery store, the time Dad spilt mustard on his tie when we went to that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour you can come up with maybe 500 triggers like this. That's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about, well, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. Oh, this is a story about love. And so on my computer, I literally have hundreds of files like this with tens of thousands of stories. And so these stories then, they have a point when I'm using them in a presentation. I'll give you an example. I got Kathy on my mind, my professional polo saddle maker. So she was having a difficult time with her call to action. And so I said, well, what do you want your audience to do? What's the action that you want them to do? And she says, well, I want them to understand that they can't do it on their own. And I said, oh, so you need to hire an expert story. And she said, yes. I'm like, okay, so here's what you do. So the best way to tell stories is not to hit the nail on the head. You shouldn't be talking about what you're specifically selling. You should be creating a metaphor. And so I gave her this example. I said, I'll leave you with this. Many years ago, my wife and I had tickets to the theater and we were dressed to the nines, all excited as we were driving to the theater. Well, then we got a flat tire. And my wife said, well, I'm going to call the tow truck. I'm like, you don't have to call a tow truck. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I opened up the trunk, I got the spare tire, and then I got the pumper thing and the thing shaped like an X to try and unscrew the bolts. 27 minutes later, I had grease all over myself. My wife is shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. And unbeknownst to me, she'd actually already called a tow truck. And the tow truck shows up, and this 17-year-old kid hops out of the tow truck, and he's able to fix the flat tire in 3 minutes flat. You know, I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do it ourselves. But if you want to save time, you want to save money, and you want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so what I'm showing, Kathy, is here's a story that illustrates to your audience, well, they could do it, but it's going to take them longer. It's going to cost them maybe more money, and it's just going to be embarrassing. I mean, there's a zillion different types of stories you could do for that kind of point, but this is the way you craft. And I like funny stories. I mean, I like story. You know, I work with a guy, Badr. He's from Saudi Arabia. The guy's amazing. He's climbed the highest peak on every continent. He's swam with sharks in Madagascar. He did the Iditarod in the North Pole. He's crazy. I'm like, nobody can relate to you. I said, those aren't like. A lot of I deal with this all the time. Oh, I never climbed Mount Everest. I'm like, how many people in your audience have climbed Mount Everest? None of them. But they all argued with their wife over some stupid TV program that they were watching. So tell a story like that. That's what's going to relate to people. Everybody peed their pants when they were in first grade. That's a story people can relate to. And so that's what I would emphasize to your audience. If they're really trying to connect, Well, you don't connect by these. I know people say that you have to prove that you're extraordinary to your audience. I actually disagree with that entirely. The fact that you're on stage automatically shows that you're an expert. I mean, people don't need to know anything about you, Jon, but you have a podcast. You're an expert. I mean, how many of your, that's what I actually like about you, Jon. I can't stand, how many of your friends said, oh, I'm going to have a podcast? They never put together a podcast. They didn't do anything. Most people don't do anything. I like people that do things. This is why I only work with people that do things. And so what you want to do is just, how do I connect with my audience? What are things that all of us experience? All of us, here, I'll give you an example. So I start a presentation where I'm like, when I was an elementary school teacher, every other teacher in my school went through hundreds, if not thousands, of Band-Aids every single school year. I mean, kids love Band-Aids. They work better than smokes on the prison yard. Well, every year I went through exactly one Band-Aid. And my colleagues asked, well, what's your secret, Danny? I'm like, well, on the first day of school, I always have one little chubby boy in class. We'll call him Paco. He's picking at a scab all morning long. And finally, after lunch, he has success. He starts bleeding. And the annoying little girl next to him rubs her nose, raises her hand, says, Mr. Brassell, Paco's bleeding. I'm like, oh my gosh, Paco, you know what you need? You need a Band-Aid. Now, 33 little heads look at me. I'm like, I got a drawer full of Band-Aids in my desk. And I don't just have ordinary Band-Aids. I have Mighty Morphin Power Ranger Band-Aids. And I'm going to give you the Green Ranger because he's the coolest. Now Paco's grinning and all the kids are smiling. I take him to my desk. I say, before I put on the Band-Aid, we got to clean out the wound. Then I show the kids the bottle of rubbing alcohol. I say, okay, Paco, hold on to my hand. This might sting a little bit. I start put on the Band-Aid. All right, kids, anybody else need a Band-Aid? My students can have a skull fracture, and they will never ask me for a Band-Aid. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not giving you Band-Aids today. I'm giving you practical strategies on how to create a well-crafted presentation that will get you more clients that convert. That's how you use a story to illustrate a point.
I think you've just demonstrated it expertly. So yeah, I think just those two examples, and like I say, can resonate straight away with that whole feeling of not being able to change a tire and getting somebody in to do it. But yeah, it is that human connection first, and all the rest can come later, I think. So no, I think you've demonstrated that expertly. What I do want to ask, because we touched on it near the beginning of the podcast, is people who are potentially shy, they're anxious, they want to get better at public speaking, but struggle with how to do it. How do you stop procrastinating and take that first step? Where should people begin if they want to improve their public speaking?
Your answer lied in your question, Jon. Take the first step. You got to do it. It's just like Jason. It's practice. I'm not going to give his name. I work with a very famous athlete, and this athlete has no problem leading his teams to victories in front of 100,000 people, but you put him on stage and he is going to pee his pants. It's unbelievable to me. It cracks me up. And it got so bad, I just told him, I'm like, you know what? You're famous enough. People are just excited to see you. And so here's what you're going to do. You're just going to look at your feet, walk back and forth and tell the story. And people have no problem with that. He's an extreme. I've never actually had, it actually always cracks me up. I give him a hard time about it because he's so nervous. But I was working with a woman who was terrified. She was shaking. And so I actually told her, do exactly what the comedians do. Just say, I am so nervous. Just immediately confess it to your audience, because this is the cool thing, Jon. Audiences are pretty cool. They don't want you to fail. There's nothing worse than watching a person bomb on stage. It's uncomfortable for everybody. And so the moment you confess, I'm nervous, people are going to be like, oh, no, you can do it. You're going to get your audience behind you. I always like to look for the one smiling person. If there's one smiling person, just look at them. Make it, instead of speaking to the 1,000 people, speak to the one smiling person, one-to-one. You'd be amazed. Even if you're just looking at one person, there'll be people from all over the auditorium saying, man, it was like you were looking right at me. You weren't. You're looking at one person the entire time. So those are just a couple of little strategies that I share with people. But again, I want people to understand there's nothing unnatural about being nervous on stage. I mean, most people I work with are terrified, petrified. I mean, and it's fascinating to me, but it makes sense. I mean, there's plenty of things that you can do, Jon, that I wouldn't know how to do. And I'd be very uncomfortable doing them. And I know you'd give me the same encouragement. You're like, the way you get better at things is you do them. I mean, my youngest daughter, she's learning how to drive right now. And right now it's so cute because her hands are at the 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock position, and she's adjusting all of her mirrors. And I guarantee you, in a year, Jon, she's going to be driving with one hand on the wheel. She's going to be putting on her lipstick, eating a Big Mac, listening to the radio because she had the reps. And that's what I can't emphasize this enough. The practice. Jimmy always gives me a hard time for going on so many podcasts. I go on about 20 podcasts a week. And he's like, why do you do that, Danny? I'm like, well, there's two reasons. First of all, you never know who's listening. I've learned this. It doesn't matter how many people are in your audience. All that matters is who is in your audience. I mean, if you only have one listener and it's the Queen of England, that's a pretty good audience to have. And then second of all, it gives me reps. You've asked me some questions today I haven't been asked on other podcasts. I'm like, ooh, now I have practice with that question. I had a speech a few weeks ago, and a woman came up to me and she told me she wanted to be a public speaker. I'm like, that's great. What can I do to help you? And she said, oh, I could never do what you do. I mean, I asked you that question. You just were so brilliant. I said, wait a second. The question you asked me, I've been asked that question 500 times. So before you asked that question, I had 500 opportunities to create the perfect answer to that question that made you think I'm so intelligent. Robin Williams, rest in peace, one of my favorite comedians of all time. People just thought he was brilliant with his improvisation. He was brilliant, but a lot of that wasn't improvisation. I've watched some of his routines. And I'm like, oh, I saw it 15 years earlier. He had practiced that. And so what was brilliant about him is he made it look spontaneous. And that's what the best people do, is they make it look like they just came up with it, but they didn't. They practiced it very hard. And so for all those people, again, you're not alone. Most people have a fear of public speaking. And, there's little strategies that we can work on. I think the best strategies, though, are first of all, confessing that you're nervous. There's a great scene, one of my favorite comedies of all time, Blazing Saddles. Gene Wilder says that he's a Cisco kid. And he's like, you ain't he's like, show me your hand. He shows him his right hand. He's like, steady as a rock. He's like, yeah, but I shoot with this hand. And the other hand's like shaking. Well, that's all you have to do on stage. I'm nervous as can be. Like, I'll give you a strategy I do is I don't want to brag about myself. And so I write my introduction so the person introducing me makes me sound like Jesus Christ, and then I can get up on stage and say, yeah, Jesus Christ forgot to wear his dress socks. So now the audience, somebody else bragged about me, but now I've related to the audience myself. To me, that's an easy strategy to get the bragging out of the way.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of great strategies and takeaways. I think the one for me today will certainly be the one about sitting down for an hour and thinking about all the stories that's happened in my life and what they actually relate to and what that actually means. And I think everyone's got stories like that. They can just look behind a meaning and have those ready to go. So like you say, you don't have to think off the bat. You've got them ready to go. What I'd like to do next is just find out a little bit more about your mindset and some of the things you do daily to get you in the right headspace for the day. And I think to start with, because you are a public speaker, do you have any particular rituals that you have before getting up on stage?
Well, so Jon, I always start off the day reading positive. I read the Bible, but I'll read something positive. I don't have time for negativity. I like positive stories. That's why my wife, she's always annoyed because I love watching the Olympics because there's so many great stories in the Olympics. She's annoyed at me because I always root against America. And she's like, why are you rooting against America? I'm like, who am I going to root for, honey? The American with a microchip in his Nike shoes, or the barefoot Sudanese refugee who just survived a civil war? Of course I'm rooting for that. They do his backstory. He's like, I learned how to run running away from the bullets in my village. I'm like, of course I'm rooting for that guy. It's an incredible story. But here's the tool that most people waste their time on. Most people waste their time on cell phones. I think when used properly, this is a wonderful tool. And so what I do is I have all kinds of alerts on my calendar every day to learn different things. And so I'm a bad Christian, so I'm trying to learn different pieces of scripture. And so like every day I've been practicing at 4:29 p.m. I get an alert to go over Ephesians 4:29, which is, man, Ephesians 4, okay. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful in building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Okay, I'm practicing that. I read the book Dune by Frank Herbert, and there's a thing in Dune called the Litany Against Fear, which I love. I've been practicing that. So every day at 9/11, that comes up. So it's like, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. So I've been practicing that. I love the St. Crispian Day speech from Henry V by Shakespeare. It happens in Act 4, Scene 4. So every day at 4:04, I've been practicing that. What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmore. So I've been practicing that. I got married on December 20th. So every day at 12:20, I have an alert to tell my wife I love her. So those are the things I'm using to help build up my storytelling skills and things. I like John Wooden's one of my favorite speakers. He passed away, but even at age 100, he could just recite poems with no problem. And I'm like, oh, I kind of like that. And so now in my presentation, here's a good one for the entrepreneurs. This is from James Albury, which is, he dined beneath the moon, he basked beneath the sun. He lived a life of going to do and died with nothing done. I love that poem. It's like, yeah, go out there and do something. So that's what I do. And then to the people out there, there are the Jasons of the world. There's difficult people out. Oh, I have no stories. And I'm so glad, John, you're going to actually sit there and write your stories, because everybody has stories. But if you are going to be that difficult, I always say, okay, well, if you look at personal development books, one of the most popular personal development books of all time is called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, in which he shares no personal stories. What he did is he interviewed a whole bunch of millionaires and he tells their stories throughout the book. So that's another little, I don't think it's as effective as creating your own personal connection, but I've watched speakers that can tell other people's stories. I mean, I've written books and I love telling other people's, the last book I wrote, the Misfits and Crackpots book, I like just short stories. So when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher at the school who none of my students were ever tardy, because I always started off class with a Paul Harvey story. Paul Harvey was a radio guy that I listened to growing up. And every day at 12:15, he'd come on the radio and say, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And for 5 minutes, he's talking about a person and you're trying to guess who it is or what's the company he's talking about. And my kids love those stories. But the problem with a lot of his stories was he died a long time ago. And so his stories are about like companies like Sears and Roebuck, which don't even exist anymore. Kids don't know about that. And so I wrote the book, Leadership Begins with Motivation, as an homage to Paul Harvey. And these are short stories about more contemporary people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, people like that. But then after I wrote the book, I read it, John. I'm like, completely unintentionally, most of my examples were of white male Americans. And so I wrote Misfits and Crackpots because these stories are primarily about women, minorities, and international people. And so there's a cool story in there. I was reading to a class the other day about there's these two women. So I'm trying to demonstrate to your audience how you can use other people's stories to get your audience connected. So I'm like, there's these two women, Martha and Agnes. They're both choreographers in New York City. And Agnes has just opened up her third show on Broadway, and audiences seem to like it, but the critics have just torn it apart. And she looks at Martha. She's like, I think I'm just going to close down the show. And Martha looks at her and says, no, you can't do that. Don't let somebody else criticize your work. You can't even criticize your work. There's only one you. There's never been another you. There's never going to be another you. But if you shut down this show, you are denying the world your gift. Well, Martha was Martha Graham, who's considered the mother of modern dance. She won the Kennedy Center Honors, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Very famous. Agnes, her friend, was Agnes DeMille. She won the same honors, and she became the very first woman to have 3 concurrent hit musicals on Broadway. She decided to keep the play open, but she changed the name of it to Oklahoma. And so telling stories like that, that's another way to bring people in. Again, I think your personal stories are the best way of doing it, but you can also use other people's stories to create a well-crafted presentation.
Fantastic, thank you. What I'd next like to go on to is there one lesson in life or personally or business that you wish you'd learned sooner?
One lesson is don't live life with regrets. I've had lots of harsh lessons, but every harsh lesson set me up for the success that would push me forward. I mean, you look at a person like Thomas Edison, and his best inventions came as a result of all kinds of different failures. And I really wish I could learn from other people's failures, but I don't seem to be that bright. And I have to go through those things myself. So I don't live life with regrets. And I don't think anybody should live life with regrets. I think, it's what I preach to my students. I'm like, hey, the rear view mirror is a lot smaller than the windshield. Let's focus on what's coming up. I'm not a person who has time for paying attention to all my mistakes in the past. So I wouldn't do anything differently. Everything served a purpose.
Fantastic. If there's one lesson you'd like people to take away from this podcast, what would it be?
Well, I'll give you an offer and then I'll give you a lesson. As a thank you, Jon, to you and your audience for paying attention to me today, I wanted to give everybody a great little thing. If you go to freestoryguide.com, again, free story guide, like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the actual process Jimmy and I take our clients through on how to create their own well-crafted stories. What this does is it takes the guesswork out of what do I put into a presentation to make it more effective and why do I put it here? And what this means for you is the peace of mind to know that I'm going to attract more customers, earn more income, and have a lot bigger impact on my audience. So you can get that at freestoryguide.com. I'll leave you with exactly the same refrain I used to leave my class as they left my classroom, whether it was my little ones or my older ones. I always said, remember kids, education is valuable, but execution is priceless. Knowledge is not power. Only applied knowledge is power. Knowing what the right thing to do and doing the right thing are two very different things. Let's go out, do the right thing, and make this world a better place. And thank you for making the world a better place, Jon. I appreciate you.
And what a great lesson to end on. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on, Danny. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.